So it's great to have obviously Michael Wasley here, who's the CEO of Very Special Kids, and what we would like to do today is obviously talk about a bit of a series on palliative care, and in particular look at ways to improve palliative care around this great country of ours. Very Special Kids is the only palliative care service that's on offer in Victoria. We've had something to do with them from Rio's legacy, and really great to get his insight in terms of what we can do to better to improve it, and really help these families and these kids, because as we said, we think they're awesome and they are fearfully and wonderfully made. So, Michael, thank you for your time this morning, and giving some insight into this important area in our health.
Yeah, happy to help, Ryan, particularly with the hard work that you've done over a number of years.
So, as I said, the question I really wanted to look on first is, palliative care. We've often talked about, especially through our awareness, that we only have 3 hospices available in this country, compared to the UK, which has over 50. So I suppose I wanted to ask you, in your experience, but you're the CEO down there, why is that the case? And how important is it to have a place like Very Special Kids, around, so families can access their services?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Look, I've been 5 years in the role at Very Special Kids, and I didn't have a background in health prior. So I suppose I was coming into the role, probably had some skills in some areas, but naive as to the real role of paediatric palliative care in Australia and probably the gaps. Probably what I understand now better is that Australia has a great medical health system, but probably where there's improvement required is around the peripheral family supports that need to also receive help during circumstances, and particularly around palliative care and paediatric palliative care. From what I've learned now, and you talked about the UK with over 50 hospices, children's hospices, is that Australia seems to have a very medical approach to palliative care, which obviously is a very important part of palliative care, but probably the holistic side of palliative care, around family support, particularly with children that die. I mean, there's impacts of siblings, not only the family. Some of the children we support need support will live for a long time, for many years. And so therefore, the families are struggling to maintain employment and every other life challenge, as well as look after their child that needs a lot of their care and all of their time. So the pressures on families around paediatric palliative care are immense. It's not a short episode, and it's not, sort of a celebration of a long, wonderful life. It's completely the opposite. And it's nothing that anyone expects to have. You always expect that when you've got very older relatives and friends and family, that one day that their life will come to an end. That's just mortality. Whereas when you become a parent, you never expect and you never anticipate and you're never planning for the fact that your child might not have a long life. And there's a lot of emotional support that's required with families in those circumstances that probably is still a big gap in Australia.
I think that's an awesome point that you just brought up. I never looked at it from a medical point of view, but I think you really nailed it on the head there. And from my experience with Rio in the hospital to when we went to Bear Cottage in New South Wales, it was that holistic approach. You couldn't have said it any better. Can we then? What are some of the ways you reckon, as either state by state, or we could do to try and improve those gaps or make those gaps a little bit smaller? What are some little steps that we can do?
I think advocating. I mean, there's some wonderful people working in palliative care across Australia, but advocating not only more for the paediatric perspective, which is much different, as I said earlier, than the someone's mortality in their 70s, 80s, 90s that people were anticipating would happen. There's a big difference, particularly also around the fact that you're at a stage of your life as a parent of a child where you've got a lot of income challenges and you've got to juggle a lot of other life challenges that we all have, as well as support a child with huge care needs. That impacts couples or even single parents' ability to earn an income. So there's a lot of different things in the mix around paediatric palliative care. But the other side is, as I said, the medical support is really, really good. And, there's 3 hospices and and they provide very important medical care, but it's the holistic care. It's the therapies, it's the counselling support for families and siblings and extended family. And a Very Special Kids, we have an outreach psychosocial support counselling service, which is how the organisation started. We were operating for about 12 years before we even built Australia's first children's hospice. So we started in terms of what do the families need in the circumstance that they're in. And then, we started off with counselling and a whole lot of in-home volunteers to help them cope with week to week, day to day. And then a natural progression.
Just to add in there, is that also after the child had passed? Do you offer that? Because I think that's also, after the child had passed, it's, doesn't stop there.
That's it. So we're journey from diagnosis to birth. Hopefully in lots of cases and in increasing cases, that child getting to early adulthood, but in most cases, unfortunately, it's supporting that family into bereavement. So, where our counselling service really levers up is around imminent end of life and early bereavement, but we stay involved indefinitely into bereavement. There's no defined period, and it depends on how the family are going. Some opt to sort of go into what we call self-managed after 18 months, 24 months. Others can sometimes take 5, 7, 8 years. And I think that's a very important component of paediatric palliative care, and it reflects to the holistic requirement in that if we can help families to cope as best they can with all their life challenges while their child is alive, and hopefully cope with supporting that child to have the best possible short life that they can have. But then if the child does die, then to have a role in helping the family find, sustain, or rediscover hope for themselves and hope for their family as a future. They'll never forget the unfathomable circumstance that they had to work through and get through. But hopefully, bit by bit, they start to see a future, and that's siblings committing back to education. It's families being able to get back into employment and all their other social settings that they actually miss when they're supporting a child that has 24-hour-a-day kid needs.
From a government point of view, and I won't take up too much more of your time, but I know now that, is that right? And so that people know this, Very Special Kids now has government support. Is that right? I know it wasn't always the case. They had community support. Is governments now helping?
We started fully donor funded, but about 20 years ago, we got a little bit of funding from the Victorian State Health Department, and we still get that funding. It's in a normal year, it's about 20 to 25% of our operating costs are supported through the state government, which is fantastic. Having said that, state and federal government have also been really important in helping us with capital infrastructure funding. And we're going to rebuild the hospice we built in the early 90s, thanks to great state and federal support. But we're still largely donor funded, which, has its risks with it, particularly in a COVID year when you can't run events and your donations are significantly reduced. But it also, again, gives us an opportunity to engage with our community. We have a low profile, as does any paediatric palliative care service in Australia. And it does give us a chance to not only connect with people who want to make a difference in community, and obviously we can demonstrate how their support benefits community, but it also helps to raise the cause, that the fact that there are families out there and children, but as well as that, families that need support, and medical support is a very important part of that. But there's a broader community support that these families require to help them, cope with their horrific situations as best as they possibly can. And that's benefit to society, I suppose, if they're able to cope as well as they can and see a future the best they can and fulfill their own lives the best they can. There's benefit for the communities as well as those families.
No, look, I totally agree. And look, Michael, I thank you for your time. I don't want to take up too much, but I thought it'd be really important to have a bit of a chat with yourself and a few other key stakeholders in this area, because the work that you do is amazing. And, as I said, having the privilege of starting a challenge, Rio's Run and Rio's Ride. Rio's Ride, we came through Very Special Kids twice. The work that you do is tireless. It's amazing. And on behalf of, as a parent, but also on behalf of the other parents, we can't thank you for what you do. And, and hopefully by having these discussions, we can talk about these gaps and try and see if we can reduce them, so that families, at the end of the day, it's one of those things. It's like you said, medically, that a lot of these kids, Rio was the case, they couldn't solve him. Unfortunately, medically, they were like, you know, we can't help you out anymore. So that's where places like you are so crucial in supporting that holistic and that, you know, that ongoing care that is needed, because these kids are very special, as your, you know, as your name rightly says.
And congratulations to you, Ryan. I mean, I've met you a number of times, and what you do is incredible. And look, your lived experience is much more powerful and impacting than anything I can say as someone who hasn't personally lived through what you're going through. One thing I do say to a lot of people who ask, you know, what it's like to work where we do, is that these families, yes, they're vulnerable and they need help, but the parents and the siblings are the strongest people I've ever met. And yes, they need support along the way, but the resilience that they either have or have developed is inspirational. And yeah, it's something that I'm sure more across Australia and communities would really embrace in supporting more of the services like Very Special Kids and others, if they sort of knew more about it.